I assume we're live. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome you in here. It's great that you were able to take time off from your probably very busy schedules to join our discussion about the Indo-Pacific Partnership in Space Security. My name is Jana Sehnálková. I come from the Department of North American Studies at the Charles University, and I will be your shepherd tonight. Let me, however, welcome you on behalf of the Prague Security Studies Institute, which all of you probably know very well, but if you don't, let me do a quick introduction. Prague Security Studies Institute's mission is to help safeguard and strengthen the freedoms and democratic institutions in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, and beyond, and also train generations of professionals in the Czech Republic and abroad on security issues. The Institute also seeks to illuminate emerging threats to the transatlantic alliance and other partners globally, especially in the financial and economic realm. Now, it is in this spirit that we will be actually discussing the Indo-Pacific security. Indo-Pacific, as you've probably noticed, is a region with growing global importance. The importance is strategic as well as economic. Indo-Pacific is expected to drive global economy over the next decade, but at the same time, it is the region which involves multiple serious security threats, including the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, East China Sea, North Korea, to name just a few. It is also a region which is crisscrossed through or by multilateral arrangements, which can be economic or security or financial, which obviously give it interesting importance. The importance of the region was actually recognized by the European Union in 2021. European Union created its first Indo-Pacific strategy, which we will be obviously discussing today. And even the Czech Republic has been a huge supporter of Indo-Pacific. Minister of Foreign Affairs Lipavský just recently published an opinion piece in Czech newspapers when he included Indo-Pacific in one of the geographic priorities of the Czech Republic. Now, space itself, the space domain, has taken center stage in the competition among major powers in the Indo-Pacific region. There are traditional space powers in the region as well as aspiring nations, and there is a lot of effort to create new partnerships that involve different parties in their positioning towards space. So, as you can probably guess, today's discussion will be dedicated to space, pun intended in here. Now, we do have three distinguished speakers in here, and I'm very happy that in the spirit of the National Women's Month, they're all women. So let me do a very quick introduction. I will start in alphabetic order. We have Jolanda van Eijndthoven, who is hailing from Brussels, I believe. Hello. Jolanda van Eijndthoven joined the European Commission in 2002, and she's currently the head of the unit responsible for international affairs and communication in the Directorate General for Defense, Industry and Space. And she has been working at the European Commission on issues such as tax domain, coordination of enforcement of European law, and she has also previously dealt with different aspects, institutional aspects of space policy. So hello, Jolanda. It's great to have you in here.
I hope you can hear me. Yeah, nice to be here tonight. Thank you.
Excellent. We can hear you very well. Thank you. So our second speaker will be Yuka Koshino, who is actually here with us in person. Yuka Koshino is a research fellow for security and technology policy at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, where she carries out independent research on the impact of emerging technologies on security from defense and geo-economic perspectives. She has previously worked for multiple research institutions, which also includes Center for Strategic and International Studies. So welcome. And our last but not least speaker is Dr. Rajagopalan, who is hailing from India, I believe. So hello. What time is it in India?
It's 10:30 in the night.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you for joining us this late.
of course.
Dr. Rajagopalan is the director of the Center for Security and Strategy Technology at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. She has been the technical advisor previously to the United Nations Group of Governmental Experts on Prevention of Arms Race in Outer Space. And previously, she has also worked for the National Security Council Secretariat as an assistant director, obviously the government of India. So if I may ask you if you can give a round of applause to all the three amazing women who will be sharing their views. Thank you. Now, just for the logistical aspects, we will be starting with a probably 5-minute opening remarks by each of the speakers, and then we will move into Q&A. I will reserve the right to ask the first question, which will be more general, but I will encourage you to use the opportunity to ask our experts questions that may come up or that may appear that you will consider important. You can either do that by raising your hand for those of you who are here in person, or you can just use the chat opportunity, and hopefully we will see it here on the TV in front of us. So, with no further ado, let me ask the opening question, and if I may, if you can answer in the alphabetic order. So Jolanda, it will be first directed to you. So, in 2021, the European Union has adopted a new strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. So from your perspective, and subsequently I will ask both of our other speakers to take the perspective of Japan and India, what has been the biggest challenge, as well as what do you consider to be the most important aspects of that strategy?
Thank you, Jana. And thanks for the opening question. First of all, let me point out that the EU strategy looks very much into cooperation with the Indo-Pacific. And I think this is one of the important aspects from the strategy. And the second element, and I will go into a bit more detail, is that it is principled and long-term when it comes to the engagement. And I think this actually marks what the EU has in mind when it comes to the cooperation with the Indo-Pacific. If you look at all the elements the strategy seeks to achieve, then it is a wide range of activities. On the one hand, it focuses on the rule-based international order by promoting, for instance, inclusive and effective multilateral cooperation based on shared values and principles, including a commitment, for instance, to respecting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. But at the same time, the strategy also focuses on promoting a level playing field for an open and fair environment in terms of trade and investment. But besides that, and I think this is one of the elements, and I hope that it will come back also later in discussions, is also the environmental aspect. And on the one hand, the strategy focuses, for instance, on achieving the sustainable development goals, whereby we are addressing climate change, environmental degradation, both on land and probably for the Indo-Pacific, very importantly, also in the ocean, and supporting sustainable and inclusive social economic development. The EU would like to achieve many of the things also in terms of bilateral and multilateral cooperation with all partners relevant in the region, and also to meet the objectives together, which we have signed up, for instance, in terms of the Paris Agreement on climate change or the Convention on Biological Diversity. But we also want to achieve much of the cooperation with the United Nations and other institutions, but of course also the regional organizations such as ASEAN and the African Union in the Western Indian Ocean. So at the same time, these are much more high-level types of cooperation, but what the EU is also seeking is that we have at one point as well an inclusive policy making and cooperation, whereby the voices of social society, the private sector, the social partners, and other key stakeholders are also taken into account. And then besides, which is of course very relevant also for the EU, is of course the supportive trade and economic relations with the region that foster economic growth, inclusive in that respect, stability, and promote and facilitate connectivity. And last but not least, of course, what remains for the region as well important is that we focus our efforts on raising awareness on the impact of global demographic trends. Now, that said, I think one of the important statements also in the strategy is that the EU will remain a consistent defender of human rights and democracy. And I think this is also one of the aspects which will come back also in light of the discussions on security. Now, we have already many partnerships and cooperations, and this we want to deepen and want to enforce. But at the same time, we also look into other aspects like crisis management, conflict prevention, and resilience building initiatives. And what we also would like to do, and I hope this also comes back later tonight, and you mentioned it already, the fact that we want to work together with the member states, a Team Europe approach. And this is very much focused at concrete initiatives of member states at their level and also at regional levels. Now, there are several priority areas, and I will name them, but there are two which I think are very interesting as well in light of tonight's topic. So the priority areas are sustainable and inclusive prosperity, the green transition, ocean governance, digital governance and partnerships, security and defense. And there are two where space is also mentioned in the strategy. One is on connectivity, whereby the EU has highlighted that it wants to pursue space dialogues, including with a security component where this is appropriate, and establish new engagement with partners in the region. And then when it comes to human security, there are several initiatives mentioned in terms of space ongoing already in the region. So one is indeed Eijndthoven. So this is under the heading of disaster risk reduction and preparedness engagement. So under Eijndthoven, our satellite navigation system, we will offer in the future a new service to broadcast alert messages whereby indeed our infrastructure is used. And there we have already a collaboration ongoing with Japan and India to try to actually use this type of service also in these countries. And then we have the EU's Copernicus Emergency Management Service, which continues to assist relief efforts of the Indo-Pacific countries and provides an early warning and monitoring information in terms of floods, droughts, and forest fires. But I think if we look at all this, and it is a wide range of activities and it covers everything, there lie also the challenges. We have made it very ambitious, which also means that it will be very challenging to implement everything across the whole board. It would have been easier and maybe an easy way out to just focus on one particular sector or some of the sectors and leave the rest out. But I think this is exactly where the EU stands for. This is our total package, and it is based on the values we are, which actually created the EU, but also at the same time the priorities we see for ourselves in our union. But in addition to that, I think the challenge for us is as well that the Indo-Pacific is a very important region also for the EU in terms of trade. But of course, we're not that close by compared to other big partners in the area. And this, I think, will also be a challenge for us. And one of the other things I foresee is the diversity of the region. It is not one set fits all and one set of characteristics as fits all. You see this in the space domain, but you see it also in the other areas for which the EU wants to work on a cooperation. There are so many different things ongoing, and this will make it challenging as well to implement. So I think I will leave it at that and hope to come back later when there are more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a very exhaustive list, and I have to say that since the Czech Republic will be the presidency of the EU in the second half of this year. This is a long shopping list, but I know that there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest on behalf of the Czech Republic, even though we're a landlocked country and we have no ships. But I hear that there is indeed a lot of interest to actually work on this. So with no further ado, thank you very much for this. I will pass the word to Yuka, who will talk about the Japanese perspective.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me today. And I'm especially grateful for PSSI for arranging this very important forum. It was also my pleasure to be in Prague for the first time. So today in my opening remarks, I would share 3 points on Japan's approaches to the Indo-Pacific from a perspective that I think is often not necessarily well understood in the conversation in Europe. So the first point is that the notion of Indo-Pacific as a strategic geographical concept was very much driven and led by Japan. And in my observation, there are 3 important strategic drivers behind it. The first is that it's very much focused on balancing the rise of China, although it might not be stated clearly like the other countries' Indo-Pacific policies like the United States. So the awareness of the implications of economic and military rise of China has been in Japan has been there since the beginning of the century because of, Japan is a neighbor of China. So key incidents, for instance, includes back in 2010 when the collision between the Japanese Coast Guard ships and the Chinese trawlers, and when the Japanese government detained the Chinese captain, China responded by halting the export of rare earth, which is a very important part of economic engine for Japan for 2 months. So that really, and also combined with the fact that Chinese GDP surpassed Japan in 2010, really made Japanese think that economic implications of China and how China might be willing to channel its economic power for political purposes. And also in 2000. And also later, China set up this Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and also launched the Belt and Road Initiative. And that also raised questions around the strategic intention behind it, whether China is really interested in rewriting the economic order in the region. The second is to bring in India to balance the rise of China. So this also has a little bit of history. So back in 2007, during the first term of Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, he made a speech in front of the Indian Parliament, the confluence of the 2 seas, which basically means he made the links between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So this is driven by his idea that India and Japan first has, for instance, geoeconomic synergies, as India is the fastest growing democracy in the region, and also India shares the interest of maintaining freedom of navigation as a maritime power. Also, former Prime Minister Abe's personal ties with Prime Minister Modi facilitated this cooperation, especially since his second term. And third is to keep the United States, the largest military and economic power in the region, glued to the region. So despite the US pivot to Asia back in the Obama administration, the US has often been distracted by other events in the region, in the Middle East or in the eastern part of Europe, and US senior officials often skipped high-level ASEAN-focused meetings, such as the East Asian Summit. And this was really apparent in the Trump administration era, which also withdrew from the comprehensive progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which has 11 Asian countries and now representing 13% of global GDP. I should mention that back then, when the United States was there, it was called the TPP. And the US was heavily focused on military over diplomacy. So against this backdrop, former Prime Minister Abe launched a free and open Indo-Pacific vision back in 2016, laying out a more concrete pillars to maintain the rules-based order in the region, focusing on first the promotion and establishment of the rule of law and freedom of navigation and free trade and transparency in government. And the second element, the pillar, is the pursuit of economic prosperity, especially through economic connectivity. And this actually has digital connectivity in it as well, since we're talking about space today. And then the third element was commitment for peace and stability, but also important that this is more around capacity building and maritime law enforcement, HADR cooperation, rather than specific military alliances. So So this was driven by pretty much by former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo, which has now become the longest-serving prime minister in Japan. But subsequent Japanese leaders like former Prime Minister Suga and now Prime Minister Kishida has expressed that they're going to continue this approach. But at the same time, Japan may not appear to be in the driving seat of this Indo-Pacific, free and open Indo-Pacific concept, with the Biden administration taking a much more leaning stance. Its legacy is significant, and I would emphasize that Japan has orchestrated many important multilateral groupings that are shaping the discussions today in the Indo-Pacific. We can see that after Japan launched the free and open Indo-Pacific, which is now often called as FOIP, the United States also started using FOIP, and the regional countries like Australia, India, Southeast Asia, although it doesn't use FOIP, it has a similar element to its own Indo-Pacific approaches. And now the European countries like UK, France, Germany, Netherlands, and EU, and then the Czech Republic is starting to form its own thinking on Indo-Pacific. And another interesting and important framework is the quadrilateral security dialogue, which has become much more operationalized and expanded the scope of cooperation beyond the maritime security into economic issues, and even COVID-19 responses or climate change issues, and even cooperation to set rules and standards for critical and emerging technologies. And then the second point I wanted to make was that Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific vision is a very much geoeconomic concept rather than security and military one. So if you actually look at the early achievements of FOIP, you can see that the milestones of FOIPs are really in the economic areas. For instance, the first would be the conclusion of CPTPP that I mentioned, which has the highest standard in the regional trade agreements. For instance, prohibiting the data localization requirements by the countries to ensure free and fair trade, and to counter the Chinese approach of data protectionism. And second would be ensuring sustainability and security of the region's infrastructure through the quality infrastructure partnerships. And this also, milestones will include infrastructure financing institutions, partnerships between US-Japan, US-Japan-Australia, Japan-EU in 2019. And we've seen early examples of this US-Japan-Australia trilateral cooperation in investments in undersea cables in the Pacific Islands, which is also a very important strategic sub-region for Japan. And third milestone would be focusing on promoting rules-making on digital economy. In 2019, as the chair of G20, former Prime Minister Abe launched this concept of data free flow with trust. This is again to counter efforts by Chinese and other authoritarian states to promote data localization and restrict cross-border data transfer. Moreover, cooperation with the United States on FOIP, often observers say that much is on security. It's actually started from economic areas. So back in November 2018, there was the two countries released a fact sheet which talks about the shared FOIP vision on FOIP economic vision, which laid out 3 areas, for instance, energy and digital connectivity infrastructure. So this shows that Japan has been wary of the strategic implications of Chinese growing technological capabilities, its ability to grow in the region, and consequences for regional order, especially where Japan sees is key for future security and economic growth, which is the digital domain. So my final point is that probably would be misunderstood is that Japan's FOIP is also a very much inclusive vision. It does not necessarily exclude China. It actually welcomes China if China is willing to meet the rules and norms that is set under this concept. And so in a way, it's different from the United States approach, which specifically calls out China in its strategy. Because it understands that forcing countries to choose between the United States and China is the last thing that the regional country wants to do, given its strong economic links with China. So in that sense, the focus on EU's Indo-Pacific strategy on geo-economic issues and inclusiveness, and its focus on setting rules and norms as a normative power has a lot of synergies with Japan's approach. It opens up vast areas of cooperation. I think I'll keep my opening remarks here. Looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So it sounds like European Union as well as Japan want to be normative powers in the Indo-Pacific or in the FOIP, as you said. Now, how about India? What is the Indian take on this? If I may ask Dr. Rajagopalan.
Yeah, thank you, Yana, and good evening, everyone. Thank you to the organizers and Yana Robinson in particular for organizing this great panel and having me to here to share some thoughts on this. First, I think let me very briefly touch upon the two key objectives as regards Indian objectives on the Indo-Pacific, and then I will try and quickly look at the EU Indo-Pacific strategy and how that is being looked at by India as well as other major powers in the region. So the current state of flux, the strategic flux on the Asian front offers India, of course, abundant opportunities as well as to other players to play a determined role in shaping the Asian strategic framework in a sense. So the key question is, what kind of Asia would India wants to see, and what kind of role it wants to play in that theater in a sense. Most basically, India has argued for wanting a non-hegemonic Asia. In other words, India wants an Asia that is not dominated by any one single power. Indian Foreign Minister as well as Prime Minister Modi repeatedly phrased this: India welcomes both a multipolar world order and a multipolar Asia. And of course, the meanings of these phrases are absolutely clear. India does not want an Asia that is dominated by China, given that no other power in the region can really make such a claim in terms of the capacities or even in terms of their goals. Similarly, the second major objective that India has spelled out in terms of the Indo-Pacific order is in terms of wanting to see a rules-based order. And this has been made repeatedly by Indian leaders. And India has, in fact, taken an unusually strong stand on the issue, South China Sea issue, for instance, considering that it relates to a dispute far from the Indian shores. So India has been categorical, clear about how we need to pursue these objectives, and these have not been just mere rhetoric. For instance, India a few years ago, India resolved a maritime dispute with Bangladesh, now going by the respecting the verdict from the International Court of Justice, even though the verdict was in favor of Bangladesh and we were to lose the territory. But the fact is that India did play by those by the verdict, and so when India says that a rules-based order is something that we need to play, we need to have, and we need to nurture that, it is not just for talk, but it is something that India has already done, and this is what we expect in a sense. Let me quickly come to the European approach towards the Indo-Pacific, because I think this is an exciting time, because getting more countries to endorse and see the importance of the Indo-Pacific affairs is very, very important. So many European countries in recent times, like the two previous speakers have said, have begun demonstrating a keener interest in playing a larger role in the Indo-Pacific region. And I think the EU's strategy for the Indo-Pacific is very interesting. It identifies like important areas for collaboration, and strengthening EU's role in the region. The region, by and large, I would say, has shown cautious optimism towards the new strategy from the EU. For first, I think there is optimism in India as well as other countries in the region, because there is a greater European recognition and acknowledgement of the security and strategic problems confronted by the region. So I think that's a great start, that there is an appreciation for the kind of problems and the challenges that are confronted in the region. But the caution comes from the fact that Europe as a region or individual countries have tended to go back and forth with regard to their approach towards the Indo-Pacific, as well as specifically while dealing with China. The China factor is, of course, at the center of the current Indo-Pacific strategy for many regions, many countries. And so how countries respond to China says a lot about the Indo-Pacific approach. Of course, this is partly understandable because of the significant economic linkages that Europe has with China, and therefore what it means for their national economies and so on and so forth. Take the case of UK, for instance. UK is not part of EU, but as a European country, how UK, for instance, dealt with the whether it is the case of 5G technology and the Huawei sort of a decision that happened in the case of UK, or Chinese President Xi Jinping when he went to the UK in 2015, and the kind of investments that the UK invited, whether it is in terms of investments into football clubs, education, nuclear energy, and so on and so forth. So there has been so that's one set of issues. A second reason for the caution on the part of the region is the whole question of what is that Europe can really do, and more importantly, willing to do in case of a conflict in the region, and so on and so forth. Moral support, political support, these are important. Yes, it's absolutely important. But the serious question is also about the European capacity to do something. For instance, if there is a crisis in the Taiwan Straits, like like the one in 1996, and the US will be involved, but what is going to be the response of the European countries as individual countries, or the EU as a whole? Taiwan has gained greater traction in many of the joint statements, like between US and Japan and Australia, and so on and so forth. So Australia has also become fairly vocal about the Taiwan issue. So how is Europe going to respond to a Taiwan scenario, or a South China Sea? How does the region respond to this? I think that is one set of issues in a sense to look at in a sense. Second, I think there have been a few countries that have released in addition to the EU Indo-Pacific strategy, there have been a few individual countries who have documented their approach towards Indo-Pacific. France became the first country, followed by Germany. Germany has come out with more of a policy guidelines in terms of its approach towards Indo-Pacific, but many analysts and scholars have tried to argue that the value of the German document should be seen less in terms of its content than its very existence. So the fact that Germany has actually come out with the document is more significant than what Germany proposes to do or capable of doing in the Indo-Pacific. So I think there is one question of there is a question of not just the policy or approach, but what are the capability mix? That's the other next bit that can be brought to bear in terms of dealing with the major crisis in the Indo-Pacific region. Along with the capability mix, there is also the whole question, like I said earlier, of willingness. How far Europe is willing to go in terms of upholding a rules-based international order. For instance, respect of international law, openness and transparency on issues like infrastructure or connectivity projects, even digital connectivity projects, or the role of European states in some of the major crisis points in the region. And this is no way to suggest that India has a clear-cut approach, and that India is going to be involved in the Taiwan Straits, for instance. And I can almost see as to how India would like to sit on the fence and not take a clear position to not getting involved. So let's assume that Europe has some limitations, and so maybe not on their own, but along with the US, Europe can possibly play a much larger security role. So is Europe ready to take a concrete action where it matters? Does it have a credible action-oriented plan? I think these are some of the questions that have come up. Of course, the recent German military presence in the Indo-Pacific waters is reassuring that there is greater clarity on the role that Germany would like to play in the region. But there are also some lingering questions, like, for instance, how long or how much will Germany get involved in the region? Or questions like, is this more of a symbolic presence or something more than that? These questions in some sense are still continuing. And this all of this, in a sense, boils down to one of my earlier points about the economic ties with China. And I think that will continue to sort of influence or shape the kind of response from the region towards the Indo-Pacific, in a sense. A third quick point on the cautionary approach from the region is on the question of capacity building. Even if Europe does not want to get involved during crisis, what about peacetime capacity building, capability development for a number of smaller countries in the Indo-Pacific region? I think this is something important. This involves development of military capabilities to stand up to China, but also financial and other muscle power to build up their capacity to do push back on China. There are a number of countries who do feel that even though some of them may have got involved with the Belt and Road Initiative, they do feel that they are getting into some sort of a debt-trapped kind of situation, and they might want to pull out, but they need to have different options. So what are the European options in terms of providing both physical connectivity, but also digital connectivity. Because especially in the age of COVID-19 pandemic and so on and so forth, digitalization has spread to the region much rapidly than what was expected in a sense. So what about digital connectivity in the region? What can Europe do to in this regard? There are many countries, like I said, seeking alternatives to China's BRI, but in the absence of a viable alternate option, it is very difficult to effectively reject the Chinese money in a sense. So what is going to be Europe's contribution in countering China's Belt and Road projects and so on and so forth? In terms of the capacity, when I talk about it, 2% of the GDP for defense, I think this is something that has been part of the debate for a very long time. But I think in that sense, of course, Ukraine crisis has managed to do what the US could not do for several decades, forcing the European countries to increase their military spending. Of course, the German announcement to spend about 2% on defense is very reassuring in a sense. So in a sense, just to quickly conclude here, I think the EU strategy for the Indo-Pacific is very, very interesting. It clearly identifies a number of important areas for collaboration in partnership with the region, understanding the region's requirements and so on and so forth. Those are spelled out in some sense. And I think that's a good part. But I think nevertheless, I think China is part of the problem, and to have because in somewhere when you talk about an inclusive strategy, I'm thinking that inclusive in terms of, as Jolanda clarified in the beginning, inclusivity is seen more in terms of involving the different stakeholders, but somehow within the region, when you talk about inclusivity, it's seen as, okay, China is also to be included in this kind of in a broader European Indo-Pacific approach. If that is the case, because much of the problem comes, much of the uncertainties come from China's rise and the belligerent behavior of China. So to have China in it as part of the solution, as part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, it sort of defeats the purpose, and so in some sense, therefore, there is a little bit of skepticism. Nevertheless, I think the emerging European approach to the Indo-Pacific region is a very welcome development. Like I said, it reflects the broader acknowledgement of the emerging problems around international security, peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. And I would think that this could be the beginning of some loose international coalitions that are taking shape to influence the emerging Indo-Pacific and global security order. But of course, we still have a long way to go before many of these emerging these strategies can sort of converge and emerge as a more coherent approach in a sense. Let me stop there, and I'll be happy to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. That was very impressive list. And it sounds like the EU has some persuading to do that we're serious about being involved. So we do actually have some questions from the audience that are coming through the chat, and I will look at our audience in here. If anybody has any question, you will have a chance to ask in a minute. But actually, you all mentioned partly the connectivity that is one of the important priorities for pretty much everyone, including the EU, including India, including Japan. And this really brings me to the question that we have from the chat in here, which is related to space and space industry. And it also partially touches one of the questions that I personally wanted to ask. Because Czech Republic is a small country, and there are other small countries within the EU. So the question from the chat is as follows. So how can small countries in the Indo-Pacific that are partially involved in space industry, such as the Czech Republic, resist financial and economic influence from Russia and China in their space sectors? And I will leave it to whoever feels the most qualified to answer this question.
I will start, and maybe the ladies will further pitch in. I think from the EU side, first of all, I think what is important actually when you talk about the space sector, we make always the distinction between upstream and downstream. And I think it's fair to say that if you look at smaller countries, like for instance, the Czech Republic, but I also look at my own home country, the Netherlands, or where I'm now in Belgium, we are too small to have a full-blown upscale upstream sector in space. This is a fact, and I don't think one should be worried about that as the EU to say, okay, for some of the issues, we have several countries who take care of it, and that is the upstream sector. I think the importance is, and this is where I think the value lies for the smaller countries, is that downstream is much more interesting, and there is much more to gain in that area. So if you look, for instance, into the data and the services which are delivered by the EU via its EU space program, these are free and openly available for everyone. So this is a huge opportunity to be used, and also actually to help the startups and the small and medium-sized companies to make use of what is available, and actually develop further in terms of applications, other services. So I think the strength is to make sure that what is on offer in your economy and in the European economy in this respect is indeed serving all the different member states, but not in the same way. So I think this is important to highlight, that you might not be, or you might be only a small player when it comes to one part of the space sector, but it doesn't mean that actually you cannot be a very big player when it comes to the rest. And also, I think from government's perspective, it is very much important to promote these kind of aspects. For the EU, I would say, look, we have navigation system and we have an Earth observation system. This is all very nice, but we don't have it for ourselves. It's not a championship contest or things like that. What is, of course, important, and this is what we try to highlight as well, is actually use it, make sure that the service and data are used. And then I think that in terms of getting money from Russia or any other big player, that's not important anymore. If you use what is available and actually ensure that within your own sector, companies get the opportunity to actually start and to grow as well.
Thank you very much.
Quickly add, can I just quickly add?
Yes, we do have. Yes, go ahead, and then
Yuka. So Jolanda has already spelt on some of the areas how they can collaborate in a sense. Smaller countries can contribute in a sense. I also have a sense that smaller countries may have some limitations in terms of capacity and what they can do. But I think upholding international law, helping develop as well as strengthen norms of responsible behavior across different domains, of course, whether it is in terms of maritime security, whether it is in terms of trade and economic dealings. But I think Europe generally has played an important role when it comes to normative aspects of governance. So this is something the smaller countries can do it in an effective manner. And with regard to space itself, I would talk about, for instance, in recent times, there has been dilution of norms of responsible behavior. And at least I can cite two cases, and I think something needs to be done about rebuilding that norm in a sense. Violation of norms repeatedly by states. One, for instance, the unwritten moratorium that existed in terms of not to conduct ASAT tests since the mid-1980s was broken in 2007 January by China's first successful ASAT test then. Since then, there have been other countries that have joined the bandwagon. The US did in 2008, and of course, many more tests by China since then. And of course, in 2019, India conducted its own ASAT test. So more number of countries have gone down that path. So the norm to not test and engage in ASAT tests was broken in 2007, and since then it has become sort of got diluted further. Second is, for instance, not to engage in harmful interference, create satellite functioning, satellite disruptions in a sense. Again, this has been repeatedly broken in recent times. So I think the dilution of norms is something very, very seriously to be taken up. And I think that smaller states in particular, especially when they think that they may have material a lack of capacity, I think this is an area that they can contribute very effectively, and building back those norms are so important if we have to be able to use space in an uninterrupted and sustainable fashion going into the future.
Thank you for trusting in the small states. And Yuka has a comment as well.
Sure. I think even small countries like Czech Republic is a very interesting example of playing a convening role to raise awareness of these issues. So I think maybe I can talk about, like, a good example would be the 5G. Despite the fact that 5G is going to become the future engine of the economy and very important from the security discussions, and so many discussions and campaigns from the United States and like-minded partners and Five Eyes about the security and how to provide alternatives, and countries struggle to come up with alternatives and ways to deepen the discussion. But it was really the Prague 5G Security Conference that really brought together all these different stakeholders to think about the security of 5G, and even to think about the innovative technologies that could help diversify the supply chain. So the Prague 5G proposals that was put together in 2019, and the security conference is still going on every year at Prague. So that's a really good example. And also very important that Prague is actually doing this in cyber, but not just in cyber, but also this focus on space in the context of Indo-Pacific, because as I have outlined in my opening remarks, I haven't really touched on space, if you noticed, which means that space has not really been the central issue for the Indo-Pacific, although it's very important. And without space, we can't do our daily activities and the future economy, since it's going to be interlinked interconnected through digital devices and through 5G and through innovative space technologies. It's very important that we bring space in the discussion. So I think small countries could still play a major role in raising this issue, and try to maybe proactively work with other major countries in the Indo-Pacific to start discussing this topic.
I actually do have a follow-up question, which is partially mentioned also in the chat, so I apologize to those in the room. If you have a question, you still have to hold for a minute. Because you all mentioned the importance of China in the region. Obviously, this is something that we cannot unnotice, obviously. Also, you've mentioned that the space is basically integral part of Indo-Pacific. It has huge importance, and basically all of the major powers in the Indo-Pacific, they do have some form of a space program. So here the question from the chat is actually asking, how should we effectively counter Chinese and Russian non-market strategic behavior which distorts global space commerce? And I'll again put it to the floor, and whoever wants to ask or answer the question. Looks like maybe Yuka is interested.
Sure. I think it's this also really, I mean, effectively counter is a very challenging question mark. But I think just relating to my last comment, I think just bringing in, we have seen over the past several years about how countries could approach challenges on non-market behaviors and digital infrastructure in general, including 5G, but not just 5G, but also AI-driven technologies, data centers, and I think the fact that we haven't really added space to this also gives rooms that we can start discussing about space, and in a way we can think, because space technologies is also dual use. The big part of this discussions and ways that countries approach these digital infrastructure, including 5G, was that the fact that it's a dual-use technology, and there's a risk that these technologies by China could be used for security and military purposes. And I think this discussion also applies to space. So that could be a way for like-minded partners to approach this. But the challenge I meant by effective is that I think we're still lacking the enforcement aspect of it. We have seen like-minded partners create minilaterals, multilaterals, groupings to think about how we can approach this predatory kind of market activities by China. But I think we have really lacked how to actually bind China to these the rules and enforce it.
Thank you. Other speakers, would you like to add anything to Yuka's comment?
I can add something. I think what we actually should do is stay away from, facing it as a competitive challenge in this respect. I think when it comes to the space programs of different countries, I think from the EU perspective, we take our own strength in this respect. And I fully agree with Yuka, the previous speaker, that also when it comes to space, everything you design or you deliver is dual use. I mean, the EU space program is civilian in nature. But of course, no doubt about it, our services and data are also used by the military in EU member states, or actually even outside the EU. So I don't think that this is very much a situation of that you want to be competitive. What is important, of course, is to make sure that for those aspects of your own security, and this is one of the aspects for the EU, that you ensure that you remain autonomous. So this is very much the starting point from our perspective. We need to ensure that we keep an autonomous access to space. But I think one of the main issues, and this is of course a very global challenge, and we also have taken just a first step in this respect, is how do we actually secure a sustainable space? And this, I think, will be a threat also in the future in terms of the security on Earth, because what we see is of course a huge range of satellites going into the sky. A huge amount also of capabilities to actually jam and even attack systems from others. So this will be the main challenge, and there, at least from the EU perspective, it's important that we have a dialogue in UN format, because this is something which we cannot nor should we actually discuss in a very limited fashion. This is something which concerns us all and should concern us all. And it's on the one hand, of course, very obvious for those who can claim to be a space power, but I think it will also be important for the smaller countries actually who use, for instance, the data and the services to actually ensure a sustainable situation on Earth. Thank you.
I just want to add to that, if I can very quickly, I'll do that. So I think I agree with both Yuka and Jolanda. But I think one thing I want to highlight is that I think we also need to, as democracies, these are not going to be easy decisions in terms of coming together and developing a coherent approach. But I think some of the rationale needs to be very clearly understood and appreciated by each of us. And that first one is that ensuring that no power, whether it is China or Russia, that they are not able to gain cohesive capacity because they enjoy certain technological advantage, in a sense, whether it is in terms of space or other critical technologies, and how they have been using this. And this has been particularly playing out in the Indo-Pacific, which is in a sense witnessing both the use of technology to penetrate societies, but also use of technology by some states for political and strategic ends, in a sense, to use political pressure to determine the technological choices. And I think when it comes to the 5G is the best example in that sense, and how China has been sort of pressuring other countries to accept, which could potentially give China a huge capacity, a strategic advantage in a sense. But I think this is something it's not going to be easy to counter, in a sense, whether it is Russia and China. It's not going to be easy to counter unless this particular strategic rationale is understood and appreciated by all of the major other powers, in a sense.
Thank you very much for this comment. Now, do we have any questions here in the audience? You didn't have a chance yet. I see one hand up. Yes, please go ahead. There will be a microphone coming so that you can actually hear in the Zoom room.
Thank you very much. My name is Ikuo Shoji. I'm from Embassy of Japan in Prague. I have a particular question following today's topic. More or less, until today, the development or cooperation in the space has been led by government, and the cooperation was done between G2G, between government and government. On the other hand, when we look at the situation in a business community, for example, in Japan, there is a lot of initiatives, projects led by private companies or small startups. So there is in Japan awareness that the now government has a law to encourage the business society to develop their activities and even cooperation with other companies in abroad. So in Japan, there is this kind of awareness. And my question is, how about in European unions? There is same awareness and same kind of initiatives can be expected, or even the European Commission has already have any platform or tools to encourage in this direction? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Could you all hear it well in the Zoom room? Excellent. I think that this question was pretty much directed to Jolanda, so if you want to take it away.
Yes, of course. Well, I think cooperation, and in particular cross-border cooperation, is of essence in the EU. Of course, as you pointed out already, Jana, that we have small member states, but of course, if we want to make sure that all the member states benefit from either the space program or from any development in a sector, then cross-border activities are super important. So when I look at the space program as such, then there is a clear reference to cross-border participation of medium-sized and small companies actually in the procurements which are assigned under the space program. So for our own programs, so for Galileo, for Copernicus, for EGNOS, we have these indications already in the law. The same, I can say, is going on for defense, and this is of course a different concept where we work on the basis of a fund. And there is a clear incentive to ensure that there is a lot of cross-border cooperation, because then the amount of money to be received is much higher. But in addition to that, what from the EU's perspective is important for the space sector is indeed making sure that the developments also in the upstream or downstream in more general are actually beneficial for the whole economy. So there you see we have now just launched a new program which is called Cassini, which has a very clear indication to foster and to help small and medium-sized companies to make it in the sector, which is, as we all know, very challenging in terms of getting the finance to start, but actually to grow as well. So this is one of the things we are working on together with the European Investment Bank as an important element. But for us, I think this is the whole concept of the European Union, is that a cooperation and cross-border cooperation is of essence. So we also have networks, for instance, around the whole European Union to help companies indeed who are interested in doing business, for instance, in other member states, that they get the support and the information necessary in order to succeed.
Thank you. Actually, it is my understanding that as part of the Czech presidency, one of the priorities is to promote the EU's space program. So there are some activities planned, so I guess wait for it. Do we have any more questions here in the audience? Because I gave 2 questions to those people who were online. Any more intrigued? Okay. I still do have one question while you're still thinking about your possible requests in here. You pretty much all of you mentioned that there are a lot of issues in the Indo-Pacific, and there is a potential for conflicts to arise, not only in the, let's say, strategic realm, but also in the economic or financial realm. So I was wondering, what do you consider to be the best conflict resolutions mechanisms? Which of them do you consider to be the most effective? And if there is a way for the European Union to contribute to those? If anybody wants to take it. I see Yuka is reaching out for the microphone. No, she was just putting down the pen. So conflict resolution mechanisms.
Conflict, okay, let me just take a quick crack at it. I think, again, conflict resolution mechanisms, whether it's in the space domain or otherwise, I think it's going to be pretty hard to deal with because you have states that are openly flouting the rules, violating territorial integrity, showing no respect for other parties, claims to territories, and so on and so forth. Whether it is okay, of course, you can have the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You have South China Sea. You have a South China Sea ICJ verdict that has been disregarded by China. So you have a number of different cases. So you have international law that can be applied to these kind of situations to deal with this kind of disputes, sovereignty or territorial disputes. But I think some of the states like China, both China and Russia have shown complete disregard for playing by the international rules of the game and so on and so forth. So it's going to be really hard for if there is an international dispute, if there are regional disputes or international disputes, how do you really come to sort of effectively deal with the situation? And I think while India has a bit of a not greatest track record in this regard, especially when it comes to the Ukraine question. India has abstained on both the votes in recently on the Ukraine question. I can understand to some extent India's relationship with Russia and why it has felt the need to not name or call out Russia by name. But the second, the UNSC vote, for instance, the Indian ambassador's explanation of the vote, every single sentence is so critical of Russia's actions. Without naming Russia, India has gone that far. But I think, if you ask me personally, I would say India should call out, because this can happen to India tomorrow. And especially when India argues and articulates very clearly the need for respect for international law, play by the rules of the game, non-violation of territorial integrity, and so on and so forth. These are things that India has to practice when it comes to a situation like this. But again, there are different security compulsions, not just political or diplomatic issues, but I think security compulsions because of the manner in which the defense trade aspects, for instance, between India and Russia has played out. Even though India has been diversifying its defense trade partners for the last several years, we still depend on Russia to the tune of 70%. The Indian defense inventory is, Russian's component is about 70%. So in a sense, much of it is due to the legacy issue. In a sense, we haven't made many new great arms deals except for the S-400. So of course, a defense system. So in a sense, because of that, it's difficult for India to walk out of that particular relationship completely and to completely cut that off in the immediate future. And especially when India is still on a border conflict with China since 2020, our military preparedness has to be a factor. It remains a factor that India had to consider when it came to. So I think conflict resolution is not going to be easy. And in fact, technological solutions are being found for political as well as territorial or sovereignty related disputes today. So that's not a very healthy trend that we are seeing. So dialogue and political means to resolve disputes, that's a better way to go. But instead, countries are trying to use technology and finding technological solutions, which is not a perfect or healthy trend that we're seeing today. Not a direct answer, but yes.
Thank you, because you actually answered pretty much the two last questions that came from the chat, which is excellent. So I'm afraid our time is up. The 1 hour flew past really fast. So thank you, ladies, for your amazing insights and for primarily, I think, expressing hope in the role of the European Union as one of the normative powers in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in relation to space. Thank you all who are here in person. Thank you all who are online, who have spent your time watching us and listening. And with that, I would like to thank you all. Thank you all for the contributions, for great questions, and I wish you hopefully peaceful and nice evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.